Hey everybody, welcome into a brand new episode alongside Penguins Director of Hockey Ops and Legal Affairs, Vukie Mpofu. I am Josh Getzoff, Vukie filling in for Kyle Dubas, who's at the GM meetings in sunny Florida, but we're not doing too bad ourselves while we record this in Denver in the middle of this 5-game trip for the Penguins. First of all, Vukie, thanks for being here again.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you were so great last time. We had to have you back. We're looking forward to some Penguins conversation, and let's just start with the obvious. A huge win for the team on Monday night in Denver to go into a building where the top team in the NHL plays, the Colorado Avalanche. They'd only lost 5 times in regulation entering last night all season. Penguins go in and really resoundingly defeat them 7-2. What'd you take from it?
Yeah, it's a great game. It's a really tough building to play in. As you said, that team, has a tendency to come out really strong early, which I thought that they did yesterday. But I thought our group was really good. I thought Artur Silovs was excellent in the first period. We gave up 17 shots, and he was excellent, and we managed to come out of that period up by 2 goals. And I thought Evgeny Malkin was also excellent coming back, his first game back from 5-game suspension, and managed to get 2 goals and an assist, and I thought he played really well. And then the other thing that kind of stood out was our penalty kill going 4 for 4, all 4 kills kind of over the course of those first 2 periods there, and just huge momentum savers to maintain that lead early in that game. So I thought it was a great effort from our group, and as the game kind of went along, I thought over the second and the third period we started to find our game, giving up only 10 shots over those 2 periods combined. So I thought as the game went on, we got better and better, and early on, like I said, I thought Artur Silovs was excellent.
That kill for the Penguins, by the way, now second in the NHL. They've been stingy all year, but really working their way up to the top of the league. And you mentioned just the shots against. I think it was 17 for Colorado, and the first 4 in that second period as Pittsburgh really took control. That was the game, as you mentioned, that Evgeny Malkin returns from suspension. They played 5 previous. They got points in 4 of them, this team, 2-1-2. What'd you learn about the Pittsburgh Penguins? Without Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, you could argue in some of the most important games they'll play this year, and they took points in 4 of 5.
Yeah, it was really impressive. The group has proven to be extremely resilient throughout the year. I think Brian Rust over the years has developed a reputation here in Pittsburgh as a clutch player, and he certainly showed that over that stretch. Thinking back to that game in Carolina where he scored 2 huge goals, including the one with 30 seconds left to push the game to overtime and get a really important point. Right. I thought Erik Karlsson's been excellent over this stretch as well. I think over that 5-game stretch, he was averaging over 26 minutes a night and had 7 points. And so he's been really good. And yeah, I just think the whole group has shown extreme resilience, and pushing back in every game, going down 3, in the game at home versus Boston before the trip, and pushing back, to win that one in overtime. Like I said, getting a point in Carolina when you're down 2 with a couple minutes left, and then in Utah on Saturday, down 2-0 early and scoring 2 goals late in the second period to come out with a regulation win there. So I think it's been a great demonstration of the group's character over this stretch, and excited to have Gino back in the fold now.
I guess when you think about the big picture too, you obviously don't want to get down in games, but before last night's win against the Avalanche, this was a team that had trailed, you mentioned, down 2 in Utah. They were down by multiple goals in 4 straight games. They ended up getting points in all but one of those, the Vegas game being the outlier. You talk a little bit about the resilience, the heart, but is there just more gain from those kind of situations? As you go forward, it almost kind of from the outside looking at it, calling the games, it feels like a group that doesn't seem to care the situation they're in. There's just that internal belief, and they've built that within their play.
Absolutely, yeah. I think the group has shown that, they're never going to be out of it. They're never going to just lay flat when we get down early. Like you said, you don't want to put yourself in that situation too often, but, when you find yourself in those situations, it's obviously critical just to keep pushing, and, there is that internal belief in the group, which has been excellent for us down the stretch here.
Registration is open now for the Sidney Crosby Little Penguins Learn to Play program. Kids ages 5 through 9 receive head-to-toe hockey equipment, hours of on-ice instruction, and so much more. Sign up today.
Welcome back. Well, Vukie, this was a busy offseason once again for the Penguins, just like the previous one. You guys are adding bodies, trying to find pieces that work and pieces that fit. And one of the biggest pieces, literally, and then on the ice this year, has been Anthony Mantha coming on board as a free agent. This is a guy that tore his ACL 13 games into the season last year, missed the majority of the year as a result. He hasn't missed a game for you guys this year. He's got a career high in points. Last night he set a career high in goals. How has the performance matched the expectation from bringing a guy on board like that?
Yeah, so Anthony found himself in a little bit of a unique situation last summer. So one of the new rules that they put in with this new CBA is that for players who spent 100 days on the injured reserve in the prior season, or spent the last 70 days of the regular season on injured reserve and played in 2 or less playoff games, as long as they were what they call 400 game players for pension purposes, which basically means 400 games on a NHL roster or injured reserve, they could sign deals with performance bonuses. And so, Anthony was, in a unique situation where he was able, if he signed a 1-year deal, to sign a deal with performance bonuses. And so we tried to kind of structure his contract in a way that incentivized him to the maximum level, both to play games and to perform at a high level. And like you said, I think it's worked out really great for him, with career highs in goals, assists, and points right now. He's been part of a line for a large chunk of the season with Ben Kindle and Justin Brazeau that's been really effective for us. So, we're really happy with that.
Yeah, I can't imagine you'd be unhappy with how well he's played. But, this stretch we mentioned, you brought up Brian Rust as one of those guys that stepped up without Malkin and Crosby. Malkin now being back in the fold. Mantha was right there, too. I mean, there's something to be said for, one, producing, but maybe also producing when the stakes are highest.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at sort of this stretch of games. There's the game at home against Boston that we referenced earlier. Right before the road trip, he scores 2 huge third-period goals as part of a comeback where we end up winning a game where we were down 3-0. And then, there's the game in Utah where we're down 2-0, and then we get a 5-on-3 power play, and you're late in the second period, and you kind of know that if you got a chance to come back in that game, you probably need to convert when you get that 5-on-3 power play, and he sneaks one in short side. And then again last night, we go up 1-0 early, and then McKinnon ties the game 1-1, and then Mantha, 15 seconds later scores on the breakaway. So he's scored some extremely timely goals for us, and like you said, in a stretch where we're missing Sid, missing Gino, he was outstanding.
He was impressive yet again. As we mentioned, new career highs across the board for him. Another guy who's hunting down some career highs is Tommy Novak. He's not quite there yet. He was another guy you guys brought on board last year at the trade deadline from Nashville. Only ended up playing a couple games before a foot injury kept him out for the rest of the year. He's come back this year. A little bit of a slow start, but he's been massive for you guys down the middle. And I'm just curious, when you think about the body of work for him this year, how it's kind of translated to what you hope for.
Yeah, like you said, we brought in Tommy last year at the trade deadline with Luke Schenn as part of a deal where we sent out Michael Bunting. He came in, played 2 games, and then wasn't able to participate for the rest of the season with an injury. And then he came back this year, he's continued to get better and better as the season goes on. He's very slippery out there. His ability to transport pucks through the neutral zone and his ability to enter with control into the offensive zone is, probably one of the best that we have on our team. His chemistry with Evgeny Malkin and Igor Chinnikov has been excellent. Last week when Gino was out, he played really well on a line with Mantha and Ville Koivunen as well. So he's been excellent for us, and somebody that we've relied on a lot this season for sure.
Yeah, he's been great. I mean, you talk about a lot of your guys as far as players down the middle. There's been a lot of success on that front with guys stepping into roles that maybe they haven't been in this position, or maybe even in the case of Ben Kindle, a league that he hasn't been in this position, against men that he's never played against. 18 years old. We were joking about on the broadcast the other day. You go back to June, and he's picked 11th overall, and obviously you guys were extremely high on him. I know Kyle's talked about how much Wes Clark believed in him, but the rest of the league, when that name was said, was kind of thinking, who? Where's this guy come from? And I think everyone now knows his name. And probably if you do a redraft, that guy's going top 5, no questions asked, with how he's played this year.
Yeah, he's been excellent for us. Like you said, Wes Clark was, watching him really closely, all year last year. And, one of the great things about Wes is that he doesn't pay too close attention to what the consensus is or isn't on different players. And so, he had a huge belief in Ben. Ben has, incredible IQ on the ice, which I think has shown throughout the season, not just for a player his age, but in general. And I mean, if you look at our forward group, he's one of 3 forwards with Brian Rust and Ricard Raquel, who plays a regular role on both the power play and the penalty kill, which I think sort of speaks to his, coachability and ability to pick up concepts quickly and adapt to different situations, which for a player at 18 years old is excellent. And so, for him, we just want to see him continue to keep pushing and, testing the limits of how great a player he can be.
A lot more for us to get to as this road trip rolls on, and so does this show. So stay with us after this.
No one gets you ready for puck drop like Penguins Face Off Live. Pre-game insights, analysis, and a word straight from the coach. Penguins Face Off Live before every game on SportsNet Pittsburgh. Presented by Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Welcome back. Well, as Vukie just mentioned prior to us going to break, Elmer Soderblom gets his first goal as a Pittsburgh Penguin, actually first multi-point game of his career in that win against the Colorado Avalanche, with an assist also in the Noel Acciari goal. You mentioned you guys picked him up at the trade deadline. That was the lone move the Penguins made at the deadline, but we've always said here the last couple of weeks that there was moves all season from you guys as far as trades were concerned and upgrading this lineup. So despite it being a quieter deadline, there's still been active movement for the Penguins. Point being, Soderblom's the only move that you guys get on deadline day. What drew you to him, aside from maybe the obvious with the behemoth size that he has in his possession?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I said, right away you see him on or off the ice, and his size stands out to you. But he's got an ability to drive play in the offensive zone, hang on to pucks, put defenders on his hip, and I think there's a ton of potential for him to continue to develop as a net front player, just with his size and adding a few more tools to his toolbox as a net front guy. And it was great to see him get rewarded last night, because he's played really well for us over the 5-game stretch that we've had him so far.
Yeah, it's funny, in talking to him the last week or so since he's gotten to town. Great kid, obviously, and I know you guys knew that. I know you do those kind of scouts ahead of time, but one of the things that stood out to me was he was looking over at Erik Karlsson, and he kind of said, I remember watching him when I was younger in Sweden, and he said, honestly, I was probably running around the rink as a kid, but I was at games that he was playing over there, and he's such a legend in my country, and now he's my teammate. And Erik Karlsson this year has probably been the best teammate Pittsburgh Penguin version of himself since you guys acquired him a few years back in that trade with San Jose. Second 3-point night of the season last night, and at times just dominant with how he drives offense for your group this year. What do you feel like has been different for him this season? When you obviously 50-plus points the first 2 years too, so it's not like he was lacking for offense, but there just seems to be something more. I don't know if complete's the right word, but something more about his game this year.
Yeah, I think his game has been very complete this year. If you look at him 5-on-5, I think he's found a really good chemistry with Parker Witherspoon. Those two have had, right from the first day of training camp, have had a good connection there. And then, obviously Erik is one of the best power play quarterbacks out there. And he's been the quarterback of our power play, which is 4th in the league right now. And I think he has 20 points on the power play, which is 7th among defensemen in the league. So, he's been excellent there. And then, he's also played a significant role on the penalty kill this year for the first time since, I think, the 21-22 season. So, I think the coaching staff has done a really good job, empowering Erik to make an impact and be a force for us in all facets of the game. And so, like you said, I think he's just been, very complete for us this year, and we're excited to have him, and we've gotten the most out of him this year, and just want to continue to do that down the stretch.
Yeah, and he's like many of these guys, many of these veterans we mentioned, been massive without some of the big guns in the Penguins lineup recently. But he's also another guy, and he mentioned this when he came to Pittsburgh, still kind of chasing that championship. He's been hunting it for his entire career. He's won Olympic medals. He's appeared in the Eastern Conference Final. He's at Western Conference Final. He's never gotten to the top of the mountain. Stuart Skinner's gotten a little further. Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final, which is about as close as you can get, but he's also not reached that top of the mountain. That's one of the trades you guys made earlier this year, which the trade tree, by the way, for that now looks incredible for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Tristan Jarry goes to Edmonton. Essentially, it's Sam Girard, Stu Skinner, a 2028 second and a 2029 second, if I'm not mistaken. See, I'm studying, trying to be on your level, Vukie. But Stu Skinner comes in here. It was awesome in Utah. What have you made about just the impact that he's had on and off the ice around the guys? He just seems like, the little bit that I've been around him, just an incredible human.
The first thing you notice is that he's a great teammate, great person, somebody that's very well liked in the room. Like you said, he was excellent in that game in Utah. You look at, especially down the stretch of that game, protecting a 1-goal lead for the last 12 minutes of the game after Achari's goal. He made some huge saves for us. The breakaway save on Carconi with 2 minutes left, and then 2 one-timers, one from Gunther, one from Cooley. While we're in the 5-on-6 late game situation there. So some huge saves for him. Him and Artur Silovs have had a really good tandem between them, and both perform for us at a high level. Like I said, going from Skinner in Utah to Artie last night, that just kind of shows sort of the dynamic that we've had between them. And so he's been excellent for us, and we're lucky to have him.
Yeah, he has been great, and now in his 4th season with 20 or more wins after that victory in Utah. Staying on the goaltender front, one of the big sidebars, I guess, of deadline day when Kyle Dubas met with the media was to announce that Taylor Gauthier had signed a contract. And we all know that Philip Larsson went back to Sweden earlier this year, so in a way that opened up a goaltending slot as far as your depth in the organization is concerned. This is an organization that has a ton of goaltending depth, Vukie. You don't need me to tell you that, but what made Taylor Gauthier be the latest piece to add to it?
Yeah, so one of the quirks of the CBA as it relates to the trade deadline is that there's a real effort to sort of separate the NHL and the American Hockey League at the trade deadline. So hypothetically, an NHL team that doesn't make the playoffs couldn't then just loan their whole team to the American Hockey League for the playoffs. And so as part of that, there's really 2 major rule changes that come into effect at the deadline. One of them is, teams are only allowed 5 recalls after the deadline. It used to be 4, but it's now 5. And the other one is that players who are signed to NHL contracts that are on the NHL roster as of 3 p.m. on deadline day cannot subsequently be loaned to the American Hockey League or the East Coast Hockey League. And so for us, going into deadline day, we only had 4 NHL goalies under contract. And so by signing Taylor, it adds a 5th goalie to the stable just for the stretch run here. You kind of never know what's going to happen injury-wise or whatever the case may be. So it adds a 5th, NHL contracted goalie for us. And by getting that contract signed and getting him loaned to the Wheeling Nailers before 3 p.m. on deadline day, we're allowed to make that transaction.
Those are the loops that you and your staff run through all the time. We just hear about it, but I can't imagine just the ins and outs, the intricacies of this CBA. I mean, you know it in and out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, that was a transaction that we did, right before the deadline, minutes before the deadline, just as we made sure our contract situation and everything else, allowed us to do it. But it does just add a little bit of depth for us down the stretch here in goal.
There's a calmness in the person, but behind the scenes, maybe a little bit of chaos. Hey, it all works out though. The Penguins in a great spot, both on the ice and off the ice.
The road to puck drop begins on Penguins Tonight. A first look at the latest game news, stories from around the league, and so much more. Penguins Tonight, 1 hour before every game on SportsNet Pittsburgh. Presented by Morgan & Morgan.
Welcome back, everybody, alongside Penguins Director of Hockey Ops, Vukie Mpofu. I am Josh Getzoff. Vukie, this has been a very busy schedule for the Penguins, and maybe even more, if you shrink it, a very busy road trip for the Penguins. They're playing every other day. It's a 5-game trip. You're going cross-country and back again to finish in Raleigh where you started. What do you make of just this schedule in general and how this Penguins team is, when you look on paper, given the hardest strength of schedule the rest of the way, they just seem to keep answering the bell?
Yeah, well, it's, like you said, it's an unusual trip, kind of starting out east in Carolina, then traveling to the Pacific time zone to play Vegas. Then you go to, the Mountain time zone to play 2 games against Utah and Colorado before going back east to play Carolina. So that's, it's an unusual trip that way, 3 different time zones. You're also playing 3 games against Carolina and Colorado, 2 teams who are leading their respective conferences, and the other 2 games against Vegas and Utah are against 2 really strong playoff teams. So, when the schedule comes out in July, it's a trip that right away you kind of have circled and you have your eye on it. and obviously 2 1-1 so far on the trip. But one of the things that really kind of stands out about, the coaching staff, the leadership group, the younger players that we've had on the team this year is that anytime we've had injuries, suspensions, or a tough part of the schedule, those things have never come up as excuses or even just topics of conversation at all amongst our group, which kind of speaks to, the next man up mentality of the group, no matter what the circumstances may be. So that's been, one of the keys to success for us this year.
Yeah, I mentioned that strength of schedule. I mean, this is a Penguins team that has missed the playoffs the last 3 years. I think a lot of people in the beginning of the year were looking at this team and saying, lottery. They're throwing out names as far as Veerhoff and McKenna being the targets for the Penguins. I think it's pretty clear right now the target is to get into the Stanley Cup playoffs, and it's very much in front of your team. How do you balance the strength of schedule with the goal of trying to get there?
Well, one of the keys, with the number of games that you have, especially after the Olympic break to the end of the season, I think it's 22 games in 38 days. One of the keys is that your depth gets tested. And so, we talked about guys like Avery Hayes and Ville Koivunen coming in. Ilya Solovyov has played a bigger role here down the stretch, and then we bring in Elmer Soderblom on deadline day. So you need depth down the stretch. You lose quite a bit of practice time, so you'll see teams that don't practice much for the last month of the season just because you need rest between those game days. But Rich Rotenberg and his staff do an incredible job developing, individualized plans for each player and tracking where they're at, on a day-to-day basis. So, for us, it's just kind of monitoring where each player is at and building out a schedule that makes sense for everybody.